The Saturday morning crowd at Rosie's Family Diner was loud and cheerful, the clinking of glasses mixing with a low hum of country music. But at a corner table, Tom Mitchell sat quietly with his 9-year-old daughter, Sophie. A decorated Army veteran and now a single dad, Tom was used to watching the world from the sidelines. Life after the military hadn't been easy. He worked long hours at the auto shop, raised Sophie on his own, and rarely spoke unless necessary. People sometimes said he looked too serious, but Tom knew he carried the weight of things others didn't have to see. This morning was supposed to be special. Sophie had begged him for a real diner breakfast, just like the one she saw on TV. Tom agreed, even though money was tight, because he wanted his little girl to have one morning where everything felt normal. They were halfway through their pancakes when Tom noticed something at the table across from them. A man in his 50s wearing a fire chief's uniform, laughing with friends. The guy was well known in town, Chief Marcus Webb, a man everyone respected. But suddenly, Marcus stopped laughing. His hands shot to his throat, eyes wide, face turning red. He was choking. The entire diner froze. People gasped. Some shouted for help. Others fumbled for their phones. But no one moved fast enough. Tom didn't think. He just reacted. "Sophie, stay here," he said firmly, already out of his seat. In 3 long strides, Tom reached the chief, yanked him up, and performed the Heimlich maneuver with the precision of someone who had faced real emergencies before. 1, 2, 3 thrusts, and a piece of hash brown flew out onto the floor. The whole place erupted in relieved applause. But the chief didn't cheer. He turned, staring at Tom with something between shock and gratitude. The chief started, his voice shaky. "Don't talk," Tom said simply, giving the man a firm pat on the back before returning to his table as if nothing had happened. The chief stood there, chest heaving. Watching this quiet stranger sit back down with his little girl like saving a life was just another part of the morning. But that wasn't the shocking part, because as the chief composed himself, one of his friends leaned over and whispered something in his ear. The chief's face changed. Confusion, then realization, then disbelief. He looked again at Tom, the single dad who just saved him, and said softly, almost to himself, "Mitchell. Tom Mitchell." Tom froze. He hadn't heard that name spoken like that in years. The chief walked over. "You served in Kandahar, didn't you? You're the guy who saved those 4 soldiers when—" Tom cut him off gently. "It doesn't matter. That was a long time ago." But the chief wouldn't let it go. "People should know," he said. "You didn't just save me this morning. You've been saving lives long before this." Tom didn't respond. He just looked at Sophie, who was beaming with pride at her dad. The diner manager came by, insisting Tom's meal was on the house. The chief, still shaken, invited Tom and Sophie to dinner the following weekend, his treat. He said he wanted to tell people about this man, this veteran who kept quietly serving others without asking for anything in return. Tom didn't want recognition. He never had. But that morning, as he walked out holding Sophie's hand, he realized something. Sometimes the world needs reminders that courage and kindness still exist, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when it matters most. Back in the car, Sophie looked at him with wide, proud eyes. "Dad," she said softly, "you're like a real-life superhero." Tom chuckled, started the engine, and replied, "Nah, kiddo. Just a dad who got lucky enough to help when someone needed it." But deep down, he knew this morning had changed something for him, for the chief, maybe even for everyone who had witnessed it. Because sometimes one simple act of selflessness can ripple out further than you ever imagine. Media picked it up next, and before Tom knew it, people at the auto shop were stopping by just to shake his hand. Tom didn't like the attention, but Sophie did. At school, she told her friends, "My dad saved the fire chief's life." And for the first time in a long time, she looked at him not just as dad, but as someone the whole town admired. Tom realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't such a bad thing after all. Later that week, Chief Webb showed up at the auto shop himself. "Mitchell," he said, shaking Tom's hand firmly. "I can't stop thinking about that morning. You didn't just save me. You reminded me what real courage looks like. I'd like you to come to the town hall meeting next week. Let us honor you properly." Tom hesitated. "I'm no hero, Chief. I just did what needed to be done." The chief smiled knowingly. Funny thing about heroes, they never think they are. Tom didn't answer. The recognition was spreading beyond just handshakes at work. Sophie's teacher mentioned how proud the whole class was of her father. Neighbors who had barely nodded before now stopped to chat. The local newspaper wanted an interview. Tom declined, but the story was already writing itself in the hearts and minds of people who had witnessed something extraordinary disguised as an ordinary Saturday morning at Rosie's family diner. The story had taken on a life of its own, passed from person to person like a torch of hope in a world that often felt dark. Tom found himself at the center of something he never wanted but couldn't escape. The auto shop became an unofficial gathering place. Veterans would stop by, not for car repairs, but to share their own stories with someone who understood. Tom listened more than he spoke, his quiet presence a comfort to men and women who carried their own invisible weights. Sophie noticed a change in how people looked at her father. The grocery store clerk smiled differently. The gas station attendant lingered in conversation. Even the mailman seemed to stand a little straighter when delivering to their small house on Maple Street. Tom still deflected praise, still insisted he was just doing what anyone would do. But Sophie was learning something important about her father. He wasn't just a quiet man who fixed cars and made her breakfast. He was someone who stepped forward when others stepped back. Someone who carried strength not for himself, but for people who needed it. The town was beginning to see what Sophie had always known, that heroes don't always wear capes. They just hide in plain sight until the moment the world needs them most. The town hall meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. Word had spread through the community like wildfire. The small meeting room that usually hosted discussions about road maintenance and park budgets was suddenly too small. Folding chairs were borrowed from the church. People who hadn't attended a town meeting in years showed up early to find seats. Tom arrived reluctantly, wearing his cleanest work shirt and uncomfortable in the spotlight. Sophie sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, bursting with pride. Chief Webb stood at the podium, his voice carrying the weight of genuine respect. He told the assembled crowd about that Saturday morning at Rosie's family diner. How a quiet mechanic had saved his life without hesitation. How that same man had served his country with distinction in Kandahar, saving 4 soldiers under enemy fire. The room was silent except for the chief's voice and the occasional murmur of appreciation. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. Tom stood awkwardly, uncomfortable with the attention but unable to escape it. He looked out at faces he recognized, neighbors and customers, fellow veterans and young families. They were all looking at him with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. When asked to speak, Tom approached the microphone slowly. His voice was quiet but steady. "I appreciate this recognition, but I need you to understand something. What I did that morning at Rosie's wasn't heroic. It was human. Any one of you would have done the same thing if you knew how. The real heroes are the people who show up every day, who take care of their families, who help their neighbors without expecting anything in return." He paused, looking directly at Sophie. "My daughter teaches me every day what courage really looks like. It's getting up when things are hard. It's being kind when the world isn't kind back. It's doing the right thing even when nobody's watching." The room was completely silent. Tom's words carried the weight of lived experience, of a man who had seen the worst and chose to focus on the best. "I was a soldier once, and I'm proud of that service. But I'm prouder of being Sophie's dad. Thank you." He stepped away from the microphone to another round of applause, this one softer but somehow more meaningful. The weeks that followed brought unexpected changes to their quiet life on Maple Street. The auto shop saw a steady stream of new customers, people who wanted their cars fixed by the man who had saved Chief Webb. Tom treated each one with the same quiet professionalism he'd always shown, never mentioning the incident unless asked directly. Sophie flourished under the positive attention. Her classmates looked at her differently now, not with pity for the girl without a mother, but with respect for the daughter of a hero. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, pulled Tom aside after a parent conference. "Sophie's confidence has grown tremendously," she said. "She's participating more in class, making new friends. Whatever happened that morning changed something in her too. Tom nodded, understanding that his daughter had needed to see him through other people's eyes to truly appreciate who he was. The local newspaper finally convinced Tom to do a brief interview. The headline read, "Local Hero, Quiet Strength in Action." The article was respectful, focusing on his military service and the rescue, but Tom still felt uncomfortable seeing his name in print. The photograph showed him in his work clothes, standing next to his toolbox at the auto shop, Sophie beside him with that proud smile. The caption read, "Father and daughter, both heroes in their own way." Tom kept the newspaper clipping, not for himself, but because he knew Sophie would want it someday when she was older. Chief Webb made good on his dinner invitation. The three of them met at Giovanni's Italian restaurant on a Tuesday evening. The conversation flowed easily, Webb sharing stories from his years as a firefighter, Tom occasionally adding quiet observations about service and sacrifice. Sophie charmed them both with her questions about fire trucks and rescue operations. "You know," Webb said as they finished dessert, "I've been thinking about starting a community emergency response program. Teaching basic first aid, CPR, emergency preparedness. Would you consider helping me teach it?" Tom looked across the table at Sophie, who was nodding enthusiastically. "I think we could do that," he said. It felt right, using his skills to help others be prepared for moments when seconds mattered. The program launched 2 months later in the fire station's community room. 23 people showed up for the first class, including Mrs. Rodriguez, the mailman, and several customers from the auto shop. Tom demonstrated proper Heimlich technique using the same calm precision he'd shown that morning at Rosie's family diner. He taught chest compressions, basic wound care, and how to remain calm in emergencies. "The most important skill," he told the group, "isn't knowing what to do. It's being willing to act when others freeze." Sophie attended every session, taking notes in a small notebook and practicing techniques with dedicated focus. She was learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action despite fear. Chief Webb watched Tom teach with obvious respect. Here was a man who had saved lives in combat, saved Webb's life in a diner, and now was teaching others to save lives too. The program grew each month. Word spread that Tom Mitchell, the quiet mechanic who had once been a soldier, was teaching people how to be ready for the moments that mattered most. 6 months after that Saturday morning at Rosie's family diner, Tom Mitchell had become something he never intended to be, a pillar of his community. The auto shop remained busy, the emergency response classes continued to grow, and Sophie thrived in ways he had never imagined possible. She carried herself with quiet confidence now, secure in the knowledge that her father was respected not just by her, but by everyone who mattered. Tom still deflected praise, still insisted he had simply done what anyone would do. But the town knew better. They had seen him act when others hesitated, teach when others stayed silent, lead when others looked for someone else to step forward. Chief Webb often stopped by the shop, not for official business, but for conversation with a man he considered a true friend. "You know," Webb said one afternoon as Tom worked on a stubborn carburetor, "you saved more than my life that morning. You reminded this whole town what it means to care about each other." Tom looked up from his work, wiped his hands on a rag, and smiled. Sometimes the most important conversations happen over the hum of everyday life.